Next, I'm going to be moving on to what I've been studying more recently, which is the English approach. I do it in this order because England, much like today, is a very fashionable state. They very much enjoyed doing what was popular in other countries. They imported different elements of culture all the time. And right around the 1550s or so, those Italians were starting to come into England and basically teach their trade. They opened up fencing schools. There was reported that they started fights to demonstrate, although that can neither be confirmed nor denied. But they started to introduce this concept of dueling and refined sword arts in basically the streets. A great many of the English nobles adopted this right away. They're like, this sounds cool. I'll be cooler than the castle down the street from me. I will know this style. I will use it. And it's going to help advance my station. So they picked up a lot of the Italian concepts. They fought a lot the same ways. They started using the same terminology. Eventually, the English reportedly got carried away with this, and there were excessive amounts of fights starting. Quarrels were happening all the time. People will go to class in an Italian-style school, take a couple lessons, figure they've got it, and then go out and try it. Probably not a wise idea. A couple lessons on how to stay alive and kill someone is usually not enough to really sink in those concepts and to be efficient at it. So a couple of the native English masters started calling people out on this, like, hey, you got to calm down. You can't do this. You're getting killed. You're not learning anything real. And you're also abandoning your good, strong English tradition for this fanciful Italian style. And the masters had various shades of gray of how aggressive they were about how they disliked the Italian influence coming into the country. So I'll start with one, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Swetnam, who was a legitimate London London Master of Defense. It was a real club, and he taught based on the rapier and dagger. He felt that they were good weapons, they just weren't quite being used right. Not only did he adopt Italian weapons, a lot of the terminology he used is the same as the Italian styles that had come over. Not necessarily used or spelled the same way, but the same general concept. Swetnam revolved around the idea of defense. Same thing with some of his buddies, the other English masters. They want to stay alive. That was the ultimate goal. So he built all his game around how do I stay alive. First rule of staying alive, stay back. They can't reach you, they can't hit you. So all of his game was revolved around only committing when he absolutely had to. Please, one more time. Actually, no, we'll mark this time. Now, he was also unusual. In his book, he introduced the idea of dagger immediately, whereas most others start with a more of a fundamental sort alone. So his style, his guard, was revolving around staying as far away as possible. So he had his sword refused because he knew that the Italian style liked blade control. So he had it back, he had his dagger close. And his goal was to somehow get contact, whether reaching far enough with the dagger or they throw a shot, to have the sword and the dagger commit, such that then he can strike. And that was his style. Try to refuse as much contact as possible until he get a definitive lock between their sword and his dagger, and then at which point he's free to strike. He has a very simple style. There's only a couple tricks, so to speak, into how to do this. He really was strong in the idea of the feint, which you'll see a lot in modern boxing, which is, I could just throw shots that I fully intend are going to strike. However, Marcus is an experienced opponent. He might be ready for some of them. So what I can do instead is throw a shot that looks like 95% like it's going to strike, and then I'm going to change my mind all of a sudden. It's going to be too late for him to change his mind. So, let's say, for example, like I pick a target that I think is open, like, let's say his arm right there. He doesn't really have a whole lot of defense. So I'm going to throw this shot, which is going to look real, and at the last second, I'm going to get away from it. And at that time, one more time, I'm going to place my dagger, and then there's not enough time for him to do anything about it. So he advocated extensive use of the feints. Throw shots where there's open, until the opponent just got out of their position. Either they dodged, they tried to parry, or their weapons are just getting confused. I'm trying to catch them when they're not ready, and that's when I'm going to throw the real shot. Make sense? To counter him, we had a gentleman named George Silver, who was probably the most outspoken against the Italian influence. He felt that sword fighting was not something you did for fun, or you did over trivial quarrels. Sword fighting is what you did for king and country. You went out there, you defended your country's cause on the battlefield, and at home, probably find something more constructive to do. But if you were going to fight, at least we can learn how to do it the right way, the English way. So a lot of his fights revolved around the idea of defense again. Now, he chose slightly different ways. For example, his first major difference is he chose a different weapon. He felt that a rapier was a rather sissy weapon. It simply could not take the abuse that sword fighting was. The focus on the thrust exclusively was not sufficient to keep someone alive and to offend someone, and more importantly, serve your country. So he took a different weapon, this baton. This is both for cutting and thrusting, and he used them both extensively. His idea was, he knew that these fencers, these Italianated was the word he used, fencers, were going to try and do very quick, subtle, sneaky shots. So what he had to do was somehow get around that. He fully understood that the Italians knew what they were doing, they were lethal, and that the English, their major problem was they just weren't studying long enough. So he designed a style around getting past the idea of this rapier. He knew that if he just threw straight up shots, not only was he not going to reach, but at the same time he was probably going to get him. So he developed something called the slow hand. This is to counter Sweating's idea of the feint. If I just throw a shot as fast as I can from right here, there's not really much reason for him to respond. I can't reach him. But if I get too close, in order to threaten him now, I'm well within his reach. So he can just take me anytime he wants to. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to approach measure and open with a shot that's just fast enough that he has to think about it. So like for example, I'm going to approach and I'm going to throw a cut towards his head. It's just quick enough he has to do something about it. And a time where he's focused on getting away from my shot, now I can start to attribute different attacks. Does that make sense? He's kind of like just enough. I don't know, a couple of you here might know there's a gentleman on the heavy field, Count Jahan, who is famous for throwing his shots just slow enough that the person would like defend and then recover, and then the shot would land. And it would catch everybody off guard. That's what he's trying to do with this slow hand, is threaten just enough that they have to do something about it, and then adjust for the actual strike. Make sense? Any questions so far? Okay. We got two more styles to go over real quick, and then we'll break for lunch.